come join the bond of water and take up the fight with the tribe so that your flesh may be your own, but the water will belong to the tribe. Because today, we're going to be talking about Dune and how to bring it to 40k. It took me a lot longer than I expected. This was actually one of the first fiction to 40k videos I wanted to make, but as I started diving into it, it got way more complicated than I thought it was going to be. It wasn't going to be a simple one-to-one Fremen to Space Marine Legion because they're so wildly different that it just wouldn't work. So I had to do a lot more deep dives. I actually reread Dune again, and I quickly realized that there's actually two different versions of the Fremen, depending on which part of the series you're in. In the first one, they're very much a ragtag group of fighters trying to avoid certain words here for YouTube reasons, but that ragtag group of fighters on their own, doing a lot of guerrilla warfare without a lot of heavy weapons, is wildly different than the Fremen that go out on their crusade, because I can say crusade on YouTube. I am going to have to be a little careful with a few of the word choices here, but because those two groups are very different, I decided instead of doing one Fiction to 40k army, I'm actually going to do two and give you guys two separate armies depending on which book in the Dune series is your favorite, and let you guys take that to the tabletop. There's going to be a few other changes as we get into the actual army builds, but first let's talk about the background and lore and go from there. So, as many of you know, Dune is actually one of the foundational novels that a lot of the 40k creators reference as an inspiration to what 40k has become. There's a lot of little intricacies like the Imperium and Navigators and all of those little features you see throughout 40k were roughly inspired by the books of Dune and by the books of Frank Herbert. The Dune series is one of the pinnacles of science fiction and is a staple inspiration to pretty much any science fiction author that exists today, including myself. It's a fascinating series that does go on a wild journey, but the first three books, which are the ones we're going to focus on today, give us a really good foundation for what the world must have looked like, especially Arrakis. And they're going to inspire that leading army. And honestly, because of some of the changes that 40k has made recently, including a Grotmus detachment, we are actually going to be able to give you two versions of the Fremen, not just one. And this is because in the first book, the Fremen are very much guerrilla fighters. They're scattered, they're disorganized-ish. They have leaders, but they're very hodgepodge. They're fighting with whatever they have. A lot of the weapons they're using are either mining equipment or farming equipment or tools that they've managed to scavenge. And later on in the late second book and the third book, you get to see what the Fremen can do when they're actually well supplied and well organized. And because of that, I feel like there's two separate armies of Fremen, and I didn't want to focus on one of them. I thought about just doing the first book initially, but I felt like I needed to do the second as well. So we're going to talk about them each separately in the next section, but I feel like it's a really interesting connection because a lot of this is going to be using several different 40k units in a hodgepodge fashion and painted to match so that it's pretty clear that they are all working together. So maybe let's dive into the next section. It's going to be quite a bit bigger section than this, and talk about the two armies. So now that we've talked a little bit about the lore, I didn't do a deep dive on that, just because I feel like a lot of people already know Dune between the books and the movies. And to be clear, I do actually love the movies. I think Denis Villeneuve has done a fantastic job of representing the book in an adaptation that is going to go down in history as one of the best. He has cut a few corners, and honestly, in the second movie, he did make some changes that I was kind of okay with. A few of them, I do understand why he had to do them from a storyteller's perspective, but I kind of miss what was actually one of my favorite parts of that second book. And I can't wait to see what he does with the third movie as well. It's going to be fascinating to see how he covers the large span of time and all of its successions. But enough said about the books and movies. Let's talk about the armies. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Normally, I have the actual video or pictures of the armies popping up either on either one of my sides here to give you an actual picture of what they are. Unfortunately, because the first army is Genestealer cults and the second army is Imperial Guard, that would take forever. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do a quick rundown of the lists, and I'm going to have the list linked below so you can go check them out yourselves. And that way we can get through this quickly enough that you're not on this video for over an hour. I don't want to do that. I'd rather keep this down to 20, maybe 30 minutes if we can. So let's dive into it. First, we're going to deal with the Genestealer cults. I picked the Genestealer cults for the early books army because you're going to get a lot more of that ragtag, anything's a weapon type approach that you can get with pretty much any version of Genestealer cults. Now, I did do the Brood Brothers detachment, which allows me to pull half of the list from the Imperial Guard, which I did on purpose, so that we can get the more human feel of it and not go too far into the Genestealers. But it is still holding a lot of the key staples of the Genestealers as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look over here to my left where I have the list on my screen, and I'm going to read through this pretty fast. If you guys have any questions or comments as to why I did what I did, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys. And let's dive into this. So first, my warlord is going to be the Patriarch. This is going to be kind of my Lisan al-Gaib leader here. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it still works. It gives me a lot of strength and ability there. Next, we're going to have the Jackal Alphys, the Reductus Saboteur, as my characters. These units are going to do a lot on the board as well. So next we're going to do the rundown. I'm not going to talk about them as much as I did with the characters, just so that we can get through this pretty quickly. We have the Acolyte Hybrids with Auto Pistol, two units of them. Acolyte Hybrids with Hand Flamers, you're going to do 2 units of them. Neophyte Hybrids, 1 unit of them. 1 unit of Pure Strand Genestealers, just because I really like them. 1 unit of Adeline Jackals, 1 Achilles Ridge Runner, 1 Goliath Rock Grinder, and 1 Goliath Truck. And then we're going to move into the actual Imperial Guard units. 1 Attilan Rough Rider, 1 Chimera, 2 units of Death Court of Krieg, 1 unit of Field Ordnance Batteries, 1 unit of Krieg Combat Engineers, 1 unit of the Krieg Command Squad, 1 unit of Krieg Heavy Weapons Squad, 1 unit of Leman Russ Battle Tanks, and 5 sets of Talaran heads. So, as you can tell, we did use a lot of the Krieg in here. The Krieg are the closest you're going to get to the Fremen face mask, or in the movies, the nostril plugs and rebreathers that you see in the videos. And I liked what you could do with them. Now, mixing in some of the Talaran heads, that you get more of the turbans and face coverings and masks that way will keep it from looking too Krieg and give it a lot better feel to actually pull out that desert touch. There's a lot of really cool videos. One of my favorites that I actually just discovered recently is by Peachy Tips. He actually talks about using masking tape for capes, cloaks, and turbans, and scarves and things like that. And I think this would be a great application of those. You'd be able to use a lot of that masking tape feel to really hide the Krieg nature of it, maybe hiding some of their helmets with turbans, and giving it much more of that Fremen feel. It should be pretty inexpensive to do and will give you a very unique looking Imperial Guard army, or Genestealer Colts army here. Also, with the Talaran heads, that allows you to replace some of the Genestealer cult heads to hide as much of the blatant Genestealer nature and give you a very unique approach, which is something I think would look really cool. Plus, it's something that would definitely be a showstopper at tournaments or anywhere that you take it, whether it's your LGS or just your play group. I think this could be a really, really cool looking army and could do a lot of damage. It's going to be hard to deal with this massive horde of units. So, next, let's talk about the later Fremen that you see throughout their crusades. Yes, I know it's technically a different word, but it's been a hit or miss on YouTube with this word from what I've heard. So I'd prefer just to not use it if I can. So let's talk about the Imperial Guard next. Now that we're on to the Imperial Guard, this list is going to have several units that are pretty similar to that Brood Brothers Coven, but it's actually going to be a little bit smaller list, so we won't go as fast. It's a lot of fun to do, and I bounce back and forth on how I wanted to do this. I've actually redone this list probably 9 or 10 times over the last couple of months, trying to make sure I get it right, and I think this is the closest I can get. And honestly, what got me a lot closer was this recent Krieg release. It gave me a few extra units that I didn't have and allowed me to really create an army that has that Fremen-ish feel. So Lord Marshal Dreyer is my warlord. I have Gaunt's Ghosts in there as well. Gaunt's Ghosts are going to be a lot of fun lone actors used for assassinations and moving around in the enemy lines. Lord Master Dreyer has a lot of cool abilities that I think will help out your unit as well and give you a really good warlord to work with. I also added a Mutastorm Priest to that character list. Next, we have 4 boxes of the Death Corps of Krieg soldiers. It's going to be the bulk of our army. At this point in the series, the Fremen have become a lot more organized and are really an organized military quite heavily. They have a lot more heavy equipment and have a lot more organized units and supply lines, so it's not going to be anywhere near as hodgepodge as it used to be, which is why we went with 4 boxes of the same unit. I would still suggest using the masking tape tricks to give them cloaks or turbans or scarves or face coverings and make each one unique. We did also include an artillery team, 3 field ordnance batteries, a squad of Kasrkin, a squad of Krieg combat engineers, 3 heavy weapon squads, a scout sentinel, a Tempest Aquilon, Tempest Scion, 2 squads of Death Riders, 3 chimeras, and a bunch of Talaran heads as well. The Talaran heads, like we talked about with the last group, will just give us a little bit more variety to work with and make sure we have that desert feel built into our army a little bit more so we don't have to do masking tape tricks on literally every unit. And I think this is going to be a fun one as well. It's going to be very hoardy on top of everything, but if you did want to make some changes and add a couple Lehman Russes, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch. I didn't leave them off because in the books it doesn't talk about them having tanks. It does talk about them having air units, the Ornithopters, but it just didn't feel right to add those here just because of the way 40k is playing right now. So if you have any questions about either of these armies, let me know in the comments below. I know I went through them very fast. And remember, the links to the army lists and the cost list will be in the description. So now that we've talked about the 2 armies, let's talk about how much it's going to cost to actually field these armies. Now that you have the army lists, let's talk about how much it's going to cost you to actually field them. So, like we always discuss in these army lists, I do keep these to individual unit costs. I do not do combo boxes because combo boxes are extremely limited and I can't guarantee that these numbers will last for a long time. Whereas GW's prices, while they do fluctuate a little bit, you're going to be pretty close for quite a while. And this video will stay correct for a lot longer than if I were to add combo boxes in. So first, we always bring in the retail cost. This is based on Warhammer.com on a single unit by unit basis. This is going to be the top dollar you will ever pay for these, unless you add in actual commissioned paint jobs. But this actually turned out to be pretty inexpensive. The Genestealers were going to be the one that I thought would just rake me over the coals price-wise. It actually turned out to be pretty on par with everything else. It really did surprise me. So let's dive into it, and we're going to talk about the cost of the Genestealers first, and then we'll follow it up with the Imperial Guard. So the retail price is $1,456.75, which, if you remember, is actually about the same price as a lot of the Space Marine Legions that we've talked about in the past. It's not actually too bad. Imperial Guard is one that I always feel like should be more expensive just because of the sheer number of units you're going to be fielding, but it looks like a lot of those, plus the Genestealer Colts, actually are pretty reasonably priced. It was surprising how inexpensive some of these things were. There were some pricier things on there, like your vehicles, but it wasn't too bad. It was actually pretty surprising. So next, I always go to the value cost. The value cost is based on Wargame Portal and Amazon, where I go and find any of the units I can and replace the Warhammer.com cost with those costs. I do also recommend going to your LGS or looking for secondhand markets. Those I cannot guarantee prices on because those fluctuate depending on where you're at. So the value cost that I was able to find drops it down to $1,154.41, which is not bad at all. I was pretty pleasantly surprised that there was even that much savings on there, a little over $300. And then we always have the fluffy total. Now, the fluffy total for this one is going to be a little bit different because I went and looked at third-party resellers of different game systems or different custom order systems and looked for units that could be good proxies. This would eliminate this list from being used in official tournaments, but typically if you're building a list like this, unless it's actually a good tournament list, you're just going to do this for fun at home. That's where you're going to be bringing it out so that you can use it against one of, for example, my other Fiction of 40k lists and pit the Fremen against the Rohirrim and see what it would be like on the tabletop. So because I was able to find a lot of third market proxies for these, I was pleasantly surprised. We were actually able to save a little bit extra money by going with these third party things. The fluffy total is going to be $1,098.67. So that's the cost breakdown on the Genestealer Colts army. Let's shift over to the Imperial Guard and talk about them next. So once again, the Imperial Guard actually surprised me with how little they actually cost. It was really interesting to look into this. I've slowly been gathering some Imperial Guard units because, as you guys know, I am a big Gaunt's Ghost fan, but I haven't really figured out how to field them and source them yet. But now I'm a little bit more tempted because they are not that much more expensive than a Space Marine army. So why not give it a shot? The retail cost on the Imperial Guard army is about the same as the Genestealer Colts one was. It's $1,421.25, so slightly less expensive. There's also less vehicles in here, so it's not that big of a surprise. Next, the value cost actually was a little bit higher than the Genestealer Colts, because it seems like the Genestealer Colts get a little bit better discount than the Imperial Guard do. It does sting a little bit because some of these are pretty new. We went heavily with the Krieg units that were just released. I think that's where we ate a little bit more of the cost. So at our value vendors, Wargame Portal and Amazon, this list would cost $1,223.27 to make. It's still not bad. It's a lot lower than some of the other armies we've done, but it's given us something to work with. Now, this is going to be another one that's going to be pretty heavily affected by the fluffy third market to give us a lot better feel, and if you decide you don't want to actually bring this to tournaments, and if you do that, it actually brings us down to $1,044.75. So not bad. It really isn't that bad for the amount of units you're going to be fielding and what they're going to be able to do on the tabletop. So now let's shift over to talk about how to paint them and how to make them look like the Fremen of Dune and put them on Arrakis. So now we've talked about the list, how much it's going to cost. Let's talk about what it's going to take it to the tabletop. This is going to be a little bit harder of a project because you don't really have units that actually look and feel the way you want. You're going to have a lot of things that come kind of close, especially with the Talleyrand heads. It's going to zhuzh it up a little bit. But the Fremen were pretty monotone in a lot of things they do. They fought in the tan sands of Arrakis, and they tended to not have to worry about a lot of color. And honestly, a lot of color was a problem. So you're going to see a lot of tans and lighter browns. This is actually something that kind of bugged me in the movie, is instead of the light tans and browns that you'd expect to see in desert combat, for some reason the Fremen bodysuits were all black, which is the worst color to wear in the desert. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. Maybe it's because it gave them a little bit better framing and silhouettes while filming, which is probably what actually happened. But it lost a lot of what the Fremen in Dune actually are. You do see some grays creep in there, and maybe some darker browns, but typically they're going to be wearing very tan and beige colorings. And that's going to be the extent of the colors you're going to get on the tabletop as well. It's going to be a pretty monotone looking army, but I think if you do it right, it's actually going to look really, really cool. There's a lot of really good shading. One of my favorites is Strong Tone by Army Painter. I think on this army, that will be your friend. It'll bring out a lot of your shadows and highlights because you're going to have a lot of beige and brown. But there's going to be a lot of other tricks you can pull to really make them look and feel like Fremen. And that's one I've already talked about. I've already talked about earlier, but we'll throw a tag up right now. It's a video by Peachy Tips on how to use masking tape to create hoods and scarves and turbans and cloaks. It's something I found really fascinating, and I think is a pretty easy approach to bring out a lot better flair and style here that you're not going to be able to get just from the base units. We also went with the Death Corps of Krieg because you get a lot more of the face masks to represent the Fremen that way as well. So I think that's going to be your best bet, either if you're doing the Genestealer Cult's army or the Imperial Guard army. So now that you've got everything painted, let's talk about the tactics we're going to use for both armies on the tabletop and get this wrapped up so you can get back to the tabletop and enjoy the game. With everything ready for the tabletop, let's talk tactics next. They're going to be pretty much kind of similar with how they play. Both are going to be kind of horde heavy. You're going to have a lot of infantry and you're going to have a lot of moving pieces to make it work. Now, I do always recommend when you're playing an army like this to be very courteous to the people you're playing against. Make sure you move quickly. Try and determine your moves during their turn so that you can get out and move things quickly into positions and not tie up too much time and make their lives miserable. It's really, really frustrating. Some of my units, like my Dark Angels, don't have a lot in there. You can always watch, I'll throw that up here too, my lore accurate Dark Angels video. I based most of my army around that. I did make some changes, including some Hellblasters, which I didn't actually include in that initial list. But because that list is so small, my turn only takes 15-ish minutes most of the time. Whereas if I'm playing a horde army like this, I could spend 30 plus minutes just sitting, waiting for you to make your moves so we can get to the shooting stuff. But that's okay. I don't mind doing it as long as you're courteous about it. So if you're willing to try and move quickly and go about your thing and be courteous, I'm going to enjoy the game. It's a lot of fun to play with those people. So, like I said, be courteous, but you are playing horde armies, so it will take a little bit longer. Like I mentioned, we are going to use the Brood Brother Auxilia for the Genestealer Cults. It's going to give you a lot better unit options as well as give you that more Fremen feel. So it's a pretty easy choice there. And for the Imperial Guard, we're going to be using the Recon element. This gives us a little bit more stealth and mobility and camouflage, like you would if you were fighting with Fremen in the desert or off-world as well. In this stage, they do adapt a little bit more to camouflage and things like that, and they always kind of maintain their guerrilla tactics throughout the books. But for this, it's going to give a lot more of that Fremen feel throughout time. So those are the options that we're going to run with tactics-wise. And I think these both could be really fun to actually build and field if you have the time and energy for it. And if you do, let me know in the comments below or hit me up on any of my social media and show me your armies. I would love to see what this looks like on the tabletop, or if you already have a Fremen-inspired army, let me know as well. I'm always looking forward to seeing anything like this and seeing what you guys actually do with your creative natures. Also, we're going to be doing more fiction into 40k videos, as well as mixing in a bunch of other options. So if you have any books that have large army actions that you think would be fun to bring to the tabletop, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see it. It doesn't have to be fantasy or science fiction. It can be historical fiction or anything like that. As long as I can research it and get it done pretty quickly, I will include it for sure. There's a lot of cool books and series that I would love to do as well, and we'll be bringing those to you as soon as we get the videos out. A lot of videos like this do take quite a lot of time, so you're going to be seeing more theorizing and other types of videos throughout to kind of give us more time to do bigger breakdowns like this. And don't forget, the links to the army lists and the cost list will be in the description below. And I will see you guys next time.